Hello, welcome to Business Incorporated. Thank you for joining me. I am Bolaji Akinwale. This week, our focus is on the tourism sector. It is one sector that's been described with a lot of potentials, but little effort is put into transforming them. My guest is the president of La Campagne Tropicana, Dr. Wanle Akiboboye. We will bring you his conversation with Channels Television shortly. On the headlines, the federal government has relaxed conditions for accessing the 220 billion naira micro, small and medium enterprises. The federal government has slashed the collateral requirements introduced by the Central Bank of Nigeria for banks to access the 220 billion naira intervention fund for the micro, small and medium enterprises sector from 75% to 50%. The decision was taken at the second meeting of the National Council on MSMEs, presided over by the Vice President, Namadu Sambo. Before the downward review, part of the conditions for banks to access the fund was the need for them to collateralize whatever amount they were applying for from the central bank to the tune of 75%. This has been reduced to 50%. All-inclusive interest rates must not exceed 9%. The central bank is disbursing to banks and other financial institutions at 2% from the regional interest rate of 3%. The breakdown of the disbursement showed that about 60% of the fund would be made available to women. Men and women with disabilities had also been prioritized in the disbursement. The council approved that the collateral requirements of 50% for microfinance banks be progressively reduced by a period of 6 to 9 based on the ratings of the MFBs. The council also agreed that special focus be given to the banks with the strongest infrastructure and capacity for lending to the MSME subsector in the central bank's strategy. The council also approved that the loan tenure for microloans across the agriculture value chain be determined on a case-by-case basis based on the gestation period. The Central Bank of Nigeria has introduced new guidelines for the treatment and management of dormant account balances by deposits taken in financial institutions. According to the Apex Bank, part of the objectives of the policy is to ensure that dormant account funds are identified and channeled through appropriate institutions to make them more productive to the economy and eliminate the possibility of banks converting dormant account balances to income. The department in charge of financial policy and regulation at the Apex Bank in a circular stated that the absence of clear guidelines for the management of dormant account has resulted in the disproportionate treatment of such account balances by deposits taken in financial institutions. This, it noted, was generating concern among bank account holders, regulators and other stakeholders. The CBN highlighted the need for the bank to develop a regulatory framework for the management of dormant account for the benefit of the banking system and the Nigerian economy. A dormant account is described as a bank account that has no customer or depositor originated transaction within a specified period of 6 years after the last customer or depositor initiated a transaction. However, such an account shall be recognized as inactive after the first 6 months of non-depositor or customer-originated transaction in it. The CBN stated that 3 months to the end of the 6 years, both the account holder and the next of kin would be notified, adding that revalidation of inactive and dormant accounts would not attract any charge to the account holder, as the banks would have made ample use of the idle funds. The bank said account opening forms would include the provision of next of kin who will be contacted at the point of declaring the account dormant. The National Bureau of Statistics has stated that the increase in the prices of non-food items such as electricity, gas and other fuels had pushed inflation up by 8.2%. The 8.2% year-on-year rise represented a 0.2 percentage point increase over the 8% recorded in December 2014. In November last year, inflation rate was around 7.9%, and following the devaluation of the naira by 8% by the central bank, analysts had predicted the inflation rate would increase. There were fears that the inflation could hit a double digit on the back of the devaluation. Apart from the increases recorded in electricity and gas prices, the report also listed footwear, housing, water, furnishing, household equipment maintenance items as well as clothing as other major components that pushed up the inflation rate. The report also showed that while the prices of most items that contributed to the index increased during the period, this was countered by slower rises in food items such as fish, fruit, coffee, tea, cocoa and soft drinks. For the urban index, the report stated that this increased by 0.3 percentage point to 8.2% in January, while rural prices, as recorded by the Rural All Items Index, increased marginally from 8% in December to 8.1% in January. On the month-on-month basis, both the urban and rural indices recorded the same pace of increase in January, that is 0.8%. Financial analysts had warned that the recent devaluation of the naira might further increase the costs of doing business in the country, which would be reflected in the high cost of goods and services. The Malaysia-based International Islamic Liquidity Management Corporation will hold two auctions to issue a combined $990 million worth of Islamic bonds, otherwise known as Sukuk, under a program that is now authorized to issue $3 billion in short-term paper. According to the IILM, it will auction $490 million worth of 3-month Sukuk and $500 million of 6-month Sukuk. It is the second time the organization has issued 6-month paper. The program, rated A- by Standard & Poor's, has $1.85 billion worth of Sukuk currently outstanding. The IILM, a consortium of central banks from Asia, the Middle East and Africa, began the program in 2013 to address a shortage of instruments that Islamic banks can use to manage short-term liquidity. Its Sukuk programs permit maturities of up to 1 year. All over the world, the tourism industry is one of the biggest contributors to economic growth and development. However, in Nigeria, the story is not the same. In this report, we'll take a look at what the situation is like and what experts in the sector believe can be done to transform it. The National Bureau of Statistics describes tourism as an activity of increasing social and economic importance, which involves the movement of people from one point to the other in search of pleasure, fun, business, adventure, cultural and political exchanges. In Nigeria, these activities have resulted in little economic value as the sector continues to face the challenge of generating enough revenue for the economy. As the global economy grapples with the unstable nature of the crude oil market, it is imperative Nigeria begins to make intentional efforts to source revenue outside of oil. One major area where experts believe can be explored is the tourism industry. Africa has experienced a rise in tourist arrivals from 8.4 million to 10.6 million and receipts growth from $2.3 billion to $3.7 billion. In spite of this, there are only few empirical studies that investigate the contributions of tourism to economic growth and development for African economies. In Nigeria, the federal government has restated its commitment to diversifying the nation's revenue base with a plan to prepare the tourism industry to generate more earnings and create more jobs. The tourism sector offers the opportunity to lessen the country's dependence on oil, if properly harnessed. In 2012, tourism contributed 3% to Nigeria's gross domestic product and 2.8% of total employment. As of 2013, the industry's annual revenue was about 80 billion naira. The important roles of the tourism industry as the main instrument in socio-economic development of any country cannot be overemphasized. Some of the tourist centers in Nigeria are not well developed to promote socio-economic growth. Nigeria's tourism industry is still operating below capacity, even as tourism becomes the fastest growth industry globally. The tourism industry is a powerful driver of the economic train of the nations. It generates over $1 trillion per annum in direct earnings, Moreover, the lack of adequate empirical data has hindered policymakers and other stakeholders on the viability of most of the existing tourism destinations in Nigeria. Experts are of the view that the challenges being faced in the sector include the few number of operators, inadequate funding, lack of attention from the government, and inept policy direction for the sector. Reports say the tourism sector has seriously underperformed. Only 715,000 tourists visited the country from 1995 to 2011. Nigeria's highest earnings from tourism was a meager $688 million in 2008. International tourism generated 0.72% of the nation's total export earnings in 2011. And finally, on the WTO rankings, Nigeria is nowhere to be found on the top 10 travel destinations in Africa. According to analysts, Nigeria's tourism sector has the potential to generate $4 billion yearly. The sector has been described as underutilized, contributing a meager 0.5% to GDP. However, it has since been selected as one of the 6 priority areas central to the revival of the country's economy in view of declining global oil price. Nigeria has numerous tourist attractions located in the various parts of the country, although only a few of them are being exploited at present. When fully developed, the subsector has the potential of generating significant amounts of foreign exchange. As the country continues to seek alternative sources of revenues, it is hoped that the tourism sector would provide a major boost to economic development. Still to come on Business Incorporated, Wanli Akimboboye speaks on the importance of the tourism sector in the transformation of the Nigerian economy. We'll go on a break. I will be right back.